Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Ukrainian show on POD TV. My name is Sasha Star, and our guests today are Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Always great to have you. And we have Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, Sasha. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, everyone.
Oh, the sun seems to be shining brighter over there. Good sign.
Yeah. So we have today May 9th. Historically, it was always a big day of celebration in the Soviet Union, which I remember very well. Although let's take a look at the history of this Victory Day in Russia and in the world, and what it means and when it should be celebrated. The agreement of Germany to sign unconditional capitulation was made on May 7th. And it was executed next day on 8th by representative of Germany was General Jodl, and from the Allied forces it was Eisenhower, Churchill, de Gaulle, and representative of Russia, which I don't remember the name, and I don't think that anybody remembers. So it was execution of these documents. By the way, Jodl, when signing his capitulation against France, he asked, "Did you lose to France as well?" And the answer was, "Oh, yeah, that happened." I said, "Okay, in this case, I'll sign." Now, Stalin was infuriated by this. He said that, first of all, Jodl is not high enough in the German hierarchy to sign the unconditional capitulation. It must be at least Admiral Cato. So all that had to be replayed. But of course, Eisenhower already didn't sign that second capitulation on May 8th. So finally, it was executed the way Stalin wanted. It happened at 11 p.m., which is 1 a.m. next day in Soviet Union, which is May 9th. So this is why Russia and Soviet Union primarily were celebrating the victory on May 9th, and the rest of the world May 8th. So now Ukrainian parliament made a decision to celebrate with the rest of the world on May 8th. No longer May 9th, May 8th. That's where the Germany capitulated when the agreement was signed. Russia still insists that it has to be May 9th. And they had, in fact, today some kind of a celebration. I looked at some of it. I think, Ivan, you better describe it, what it was.
Good idea.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, I've seen recent research about the attitude of Ukrainians to celebrating the May 9th holiday, and the number of those Ukrainians who support to celebrate the Victory Day on May 9 decreased dramatically. What is interesting during the last years? What is interesting that this number decreased after actually Russia started this war in 2014, and Ukrainians began to learn a little bit more about our own history and how that artificial holiday actually was created from one side. From other side, we've seen those signs of Soviet soldiers, like Georgian strips, black and yellow, all those Soviet stars on the invaders, actually, on those bandits who occupied Donbas region, who occupied Crimea, and majority of Ukrainians didn't want to have any common with them, and to support, because on the same time you see those old followers of communism on those holiday demonstrations with the same signs, and you see them on the Russian soldiers who are invading Ukraine. And I think that was actually the reason why Ukraine decided to join the rest of the civilized world and to celebrate the Victory Day on May 8th with the whole world.
Excellent, Ivan. Jonathan, what do you think about this, and as well as the latest development on Ukrainian front, and the idea of some people who believe that Ukrainian are holding on to their attack to even better prepare for it, and yet there are some people believe that the attack has already started. Where are we, Jonathan? What's your opinion?
Well, in one sense, I do believe that the a counteroffensive has started in the sense that Ukraine has launched a series of, again, whatever we call reconnaissance in force. They are probing the Russian defenses. They are probing. They want to keep the Russians off balance. They want to keep them in the dark as to when is the precise heavy punch. When is the main effort going to take place? And it is very prudent of the Ukrainian military to keep up the probes, the aggressive probes, as well as maintaining a very strong active defense. Just this morning, I saw the Russian missile attacks launched against Kiev by 4 Russian bombers. That they report that all the missiles were blocked, which is wonderful for ballistic missile defense. That's excellent news. It shows the increasing quality of the defense of both Ukraine's air defense and ballistic missile defense. That bodes well for the future as more and more sophisticated systems arrive. That gives Ukraine a much stronger shield behind which it can launch its attack and launch a successful. They have the luxury of having a good, strong air and ballistic missile defense to block Russia's missile attacks while looking for the right moment and the right time to launch its main effort. Just because they haven't, the West has not seen a big major attack in the style of the Russian offensives, does not mean that Ukraine is ineffective. They're just being smarter. They're just being more intelligent about throwing their main punch. And when they throw that main punch, they want to make it count. And they want to make it count so as to shorten the war and to demonstrate decisively that Russia cannot win this war. They've already pretty much proven that the Russians can't do it with their offensives. But what they want to do is they want to have a decisive operational victory that is very clear and very plain to see for the West, for its allies, and for the Russians to see that not only is Ukraine not going to lose the war, they are very much in the game to win it. They are not simply there to sit there and take casualties. So I think this theater that the Russian leadership has been putting on regarding May 9th, I mean, the Russians have always been sticklers for format and presentation, and that's all in the service of propaganda. They're trying to send a propaganda message. And
it's
really,
continuation of Potemkin village strategy.
yeah. The Russians are infamous for Potemkin villages, and this is another sort of Potemkin village portrayal to try and portray the Russians as being much stronger or with much higher morale than is actually justified. So I would say, be patient. Yeah, watching the Ukrainian military is like watching a skilled boxer. It's just
what is interesting that today in Moscow on the Red Square on those traditional May 9th military parade, when Russia every year tries to show all their military might, all their weapons, all their aircrafts, all their tanks. Today there were zero tanks, sorry, one tank, T-34 from the Second World War ages, and there were zero aircrafts because the official reason was that the weather was not
Oh my
suitable for
God.
flight in Moscow. Nevertheless, it was sunshine and pretty good weather. And
Like I said, Ivan, you're too young to remember that in times of Soviet Union, when they had all this May 9th or even May 1st parades, they had special devices that they would make sure that there will be no rain, there will be sunny, or so on. So somehow they put.
the chemicals, they used chemicals
That's right. So what's happened
to
today? They don't have it anymore?
I think that they don't have enough pilots and aircrafts to put them on the parade, as well as enough tanks, because all tanks are either burned in Ukraine or they are on the battlefield, and they just can't remove those tanks from the battlefield to transfer them to the Red Square to parade. And this is actually a very good sign that Russia for now is weak, that there is no so mighty military, second most powerful army in the world. They just don't have enough weapons and enough tanks to put them in Moscow on a military parade, and that
Yeah,
is
Ivan, I think it's too late for me, but I had a very good solution for Russians is to lease a couple of leopards too for one day for May 9th parade. And they gave it back, pay for lease, probably they would charge uh, $1 million per day per tank. And that would be the end of story. So they
Good
would show.
advertising.
Now, good advertising. Okay, here is a leopard too. Hopefully, you have a good look. You will not see them very anytime soon, except on military parade again. But this time, Ukrainian military parade, not Russian.
yeah, maybe.
That's really funny. Anyway, there is a beside Ukrainians winning the war, there is one interesting scenario where Russia will lose the war without actually Ukraine or anybody else doing much. Look at this fight between Prigozhin and Gerasimov and Shoigu and so on, and it's I just don't understand why is it so publicized. Are the Russians are really such fools as to make a fun of themselves? What do you think?
Either they're trying to feign weakness, excessive weakness, in an effort to lure us into a sense of complacency. Maybe not. Maybe they really are just that foolish. There's no cleverness here. There's no real objective to them basically fighting amongst themselves, and it may just be it may just be very well a signal of internal lack of cohesion, lack of
John,
unity.
then
They're
you
starting to point
cannot,
fingers at each other.
John,
Go
then you
ahead.
cannot underestimate Russian stupidities.
Yeah,
They
well,
have no bounds.
it's like someone in America once said about the American public. Nobody ever went broke underestimating over. No one ever went broke underestimating stupidity of the American people. Yeah, because
John,
they won't buy anything. But
John, then
anyway,
it's interesting for me to ask you a question which I asked just 15 minutes ago on another show from one of the uh, Republican operatives. I don't know even how to call him. He's involved in religion, which makes it even worse.
oh, maybe he's a member. Maybe he's a member of the evangelical right. Who knows?
That's right. Yeah,
Evangelical. Okay.
yeah. He was praising Ronald Reagan as the best Republican president, or so on, and perhaps not only Republican. He was a great communicator, as we all know. But let me ask
Oh,
you
yeah.
this: how it came within Republican Party from Ronald Reagan, who claimed that Soviet Union is the evil empire, and he contributed probably more than anybody else to liquidation of the Soviet empire. And it goes on all the way to Trump, who is claiming that Putin is his best friend and we have to accommodate Russia, and he trusts Putin more than CIA or FBI or anybody else.
Hmm.
What's happened with that in 40 years? The Republican Party made complete change over. What's happened, really?
That well, Trump is kind of a wild card. Yeah, you really he benefits most by being unpredictable, and that does not mean that he is anti-American. After all, he is very pro-American, but he is very pro-American in the sense that prior to World War II, the Republicans were very pro-American, but they were primarily isolationist. They were not
Yes.
international. They were not international. Trump represents, in some ways, a return to a more isolationist, nationalistic sense. And now, we will be strong. We will be strong to keep America safe. But the rest of you folks have to take more of a role in sharing the burden against defense from the East. And that's again, that's not terribly much of a surprise. Uh, the Ronald Reagan recognized that the Soviet Union was an international threat, that it was a systemic international threat that had to be defeated on all fronts: ideological, moral, political, economic, all fronts. It had to be destroyed. And Reagan was simply carrying out very well the precepts of the containment, so the grand strategy of containment, uh, which had been laid out in 1947. And that was the only instance in American history where both the Republican and the Democratic parties agreed on the grand strategy of containment. It did not matter which political party was in the White House. The grand strategy of containment against the Soviet Union would be carried out. And it would remarkably well. It was remarkably consistent.
Okay,
So,
so here, Jonathan, here comes 1991. The Soviet Union is no longer there. Republicans are in the White House, Bush Senior. And what's happening? There was a First World War, there was Second World War, there is a third one, Cold War, and Russia or Soviet Union lost it hands down. No yes or no or maybe or so, it just lost. So how come Republican Party and Bush Senior failed to engraved in stone? USSR, you are the loser, you're goner, you're no longer there. So here comes a new world order. You're no longer part of that world order. You're losers. And now we're going to do this. Get all your nuclear devices out. Okay, we'll pay you a couple of $1 billion for that. And the end of story. Where was the brains of Bush Sr.?
well, for one thing, the expansion. One consequence of the end of the Cold War was precisely what the former Soviet Union feared. They saw NATO as designed to destroy the Soviet Union. And what did NATO do? NATO expanded to the east, absorbed the entire former Warsaw
But it
Pact.
was much later.
It's a,
Wait a second, Jonathan. It
it,
was much
it
later. I'm
still
talking
took
about
place
1991. What's happened in 1991? The
in
NATO was
1990.
what it was.
In
NATO didn't move.
1991, the United States at that point, after having won the Persian Gulf War, was not the American public was not in the mood to go pursue a to having watched the Soviet Union collapse under its own dead weight. The American
But,
public was not in the mood to go or willing to support
but it
another
doesn't matter.
Cold
It
War
happened anyway.
it happened, did it? But it didn't matter. They did not have to crush the Soviet Union. The containment strategy said that the Soviet
The
Union would
Soviet
buckle,
Union crushed
would buckle
itself. U.S. has nothing
under
to
the weight
do
of its
with
own
it.
precisely. So there was no need for the United States to go pursuing an aggressive campaign against a defeated Soviet Union. They simply would not have supported it any more than the American public at near the end of World War II would have supported going against the Soviet armed forces after having just defeated Nazi Germany. General George Patton was saying, why don't we attack the Soviets now while we still got the chance, while we're the stronger? American public was not willing to support that because we had been telling the American public the Russians are our friends. They are our allies. We were not about to do a 180-degree pivot and then all of a sudden turn on a dime and then go to war immediately against the Soviet Union. It was just not politically supportable or realistic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, listen. What's happened? What happened?
What happened happened. So
Yeah.
we sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. We were lucky. We had a very inept opponent, very foolish opponent, and they managed to do. And as Napoleon once said, never interfere with an opponent who is in the process of destroying himself. So we're doing pretty well. And a matter of fact, let's see. As a matter of fact, Bismarck once remarked that that God has a special providence for fools, drunkards, and the United States of America. So
Bismarck said that, yeah.
Bismarck said that.
Okay,
Yes.
Ivan, tell me,
Fools,
do you
fools,
have
drunkards, and the United States of America.
Ivan, do you have a clip to show us today?
Yeah, I actually have a really nice video
Yeah,
for
let's
today,
take it.
so we can watch it.
Yeah, let's watch it.
Putin has died. This is the news the whole world is waiting for, as it will put an end to the Russo-Ukrainian war. But this is an illusion. Shattered after better getting to know the Russians as a whole, Putin is not the only one who wants to destroy the Ukrainian nation.
Putin, президент мира!
A survey by the Russian research organization Levada Center showed that more than half of the Russians polled consider the war successful and that it is going according to plan. 71% of the respondents in Russia support the actions of the Russian army. This is not just Putin's war. This is the war of the entire Russian society. A society that does not go out to protest and agrees to go to war. Specific people shell cities full of civilians. Specific people pillage apartments and buildings. Specific people rape and murder civilians. The Russians do not want to fact-check information. It is simpler and more comfortable to distance themselves from the problem and not think about the war in Ukraine. It is easier for them to go to war than criticize the Russian government. Putin's war is a convenient phrase that allows the Russians not to feel guilty for what has been done and allows the world to maintain their connections with Russian business people and politicians. It takes away the responsibility from the nation as a whole and makes Putin the only criminal. Yes, Putin is absolutely evil. He started a bloody and unjust war. But it is the Russians who prolong it with their actions and silence.
Yeah, really amazing video, and that begs a question. Ivan, you're aware that there are efforts of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Kasparov, and others, although Kasparov in a much lesser way, to make a distinction between good Russians who are against Putin, against the war, and so on, and the average Russians who are in let's face it, support Putin and the war. And it's a very difficult question. I think that Khodorkovsky's approach has merits, but it's just not very good time for that. What do you think?
I've heard that they can't get an agreement on some points of this
Yes, I heard that.
memorandum, especially in
Yeah.
terms of reparations to Ukraine, in terms of taking the responsibility of this war, because it's shown in the video, it's not the war of Putin. and this war will not end with the death of Putin. It's war of the entire Russian nation against the Ukrainians and Ukrainian nation. And even after the ceasefire, this war will not be ended until Ukraine will not receive reparations. Ukraine, all military criminals will be punished, and Ukraine will be satisfied. And even after that, I think ages will pass till the Ukrainians will have to do some business or even to communicate with the Russians. I'm talking
Right.
about.
Ivan, I agree with you, and I think I would like to add one very important point of security guarantees. So once the world is for one way or another, and I'm surprised as well. A lot of now people make comment that well, the war should be stopped. Of course, the easiest way would be if Russians would remove all their troops from Ukraine. However, if that's not possible, then Ukraine can agree to some territories being given to Russia, maybe Zaporozhye, maybe something else. I'm very skeptical about that. Can you imagine that Russia would ask, say, England to give them Liverpool and Manchester, for example, with Manchester City and Manchester United and all other wonderful things, and the rest of the things England can keep it? Nobody is discussing that possibility. But with Ukraine, because it's not their territory, it's Ukrainian territory, somebody else's territory, maybe it's Russian territory. I've heard actually one man, his arguments were that in fact all the city in eastern Ukraine, they were all built by Russians, by Russian queen, what's her name, Elizabeth or Catherine the Great, city of Dnipropetrovsk, Russians built, and they built a few other wonderful cities and so on. But this is it's laughable because
if I'm not mistaken, the city of New York was built by British Empire. So shall we get it back to the Great Britain?
Yeah, and by the way, St. Petersburg and Kremlin in Moscow, they were built by Italians. So Italians may have some claims for these cities too. No, this is just bizarre. It's just incredible. But some people, they're just trying to somehow justify their position or so on. And this is why I believe that besides getting into some kind of a peace agreement, which I don't see happening very soon, the meat grinder, that's the only solution to to cure these things. Ivan, how's the meat grinder working these days?
It's working still on the battlefield, and we are waiting for the start of a major Ukrainian attack. And I think that after that, maybe it will be a better possibilities of negotiations with Russia when they will lose all their achievements, and hopefully they will lose their army in Ukraine. And after that,
I
maybe
think I totally agree. I always say army is more important than territory. Territory, okay, today you have territory, tomorrow you don't, and next day you again have the territory. Army, this is the most important thing. If you don't have army, you don't have territory, you don't have anything. So the army and ability to inflict damages to the enemy's army as much as possible. That's what the key is. All the rest is noise, really. Jonathan, you agree?
Oh, absolutely. In this case, because once the Russians, you know, they had made the initial mistake of thinking that their nuclear arsenal would give them sufficient freedom of action to do whatever they wanted to in Ukraine. And then when it turned out that they had greatly overestimated the ability of their own army to carry out its objectives, and greatly underestimated both the ability of Ukraine, and they underestimated the reaction of NATO. and that in fact their invasion prompted NATO to add two new members, Sweden
And
and
very,
Finland,
very strong
and
members.
very strong members. And in any post-war agreement, you can bet. I would be willing to bet that in a post-war settlement, with Ukraine becoming part of NATO, and Finland also being there right alongside of Ukraine, forming a nice long border with Russia.
Yep.
And both Finland and Ukraine, if they are willing to maximize their deterrence against a future Russian attack, you can bet that there are going to be ballistic missile defenses in Ukraine, both the ballistic missile defenses in Finland, and don't bet against this. Uh, American troops manning those ballistic missile defenses or other types of combat support in Ukraine and in Finland. Why? Because then that forms a very, very strong tripwire, because it reinforces the the deterrent value of NATO, because with American troops in Finland, in ballistic missile defense, and in Ukraine, doesn't matter how extensive, just that they're there. That would guarantee that any attack against Ukraine in the future would automatically pull in the United States. And
Absolutely.
that is the way you maximize. And that, along with my previous suggestion of the United States and NATO joining together to create a global ballistic missile defense force that would have as its centerpiece an upgraded U.S. Space Force, a space force that it's not just composed of 80 satellites, that's not a space force.
Their
That's a set of
targets.
80, they're targets. You're right. They're a set of 80 targets. A real space force would be what the Russians themselves described back in early 1990s, when they said that the space force would consist of units and subunits, a fleet, in other words, capable of striking Earth installations from space. So a space force in this case would have U.S. members, NATO members as part of the space fleet, and they would have weapons such as continuous wave lasers and pulse lasers designed to defeat and destroy nuclear ballistic missiles in their boost phase, in their launch phase, before they can get up high enough to constitute a threat. Once you have that system in place, you have a very powerful deterrent against, and I say deterrent in the sense of in the Russian word. Please help me with that pronunciation again, Sasha. Shtержание, to restrain or hold in check. I have
Сдерживание. Сдерживание.
Zdержivание.
Сдерживание. Yeah. Yep.
Zdержivание. Okay. To
Yes,
restrain or hold in
exactly.
check. To restrain or hold in
Well,
check, not the
Jonathan,
Russian sense of Ustunashania.
Jonathan, what you're
Yeah.
describing is a game changer, because
Yes.
obviously neither Russia or China would be able to develop anything similar than that.
Correct.
And without that, they're doomed, or any aggressor on
Once the nuclear arsenal, once you have achieved the capability through a global ballistic missile defense system, and increasingly the kind of technology that Ukraine is getting, to form essentially a system of interlocking shields, then what you have is you have effectively neutralized nuclear missiles as weapons of war, and the alliance that is able to do that can impose strategic stability upon the world for not just the rest of this century, but for the next several centuries as well.
foreseeable future. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
move. That is a true game changer.
And who knows? Maybe Ukraine will be able to elaborate on that, because it has a lot of experienced technical people who still remember. or learn
Ukraine could become Ukrainian members, the scientifically qualified, could become members of the Space Force, of a multinational Space Force.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's where Ukraine could really reach its potential, and both in leadership as well as an actual capability to defend itself. Because with a victorious Ukraine in this war, Ukraine becomes the Eastern bulwark against potential aggression from the East. And if they are going to become the bulwark, then it is incumbent upon us to supply them, to basically supply them, to rebuild them, to sustain them economically, and get them.
I wouldn't be surprised to learn that certain missiles and probably even drones are already being developed in Ukraine. Ivan, I don't know how much you know about that, but that's what I've heard.
Actually, a lot, and I've got some fellows who are in high-tech business, and they've changed their business from home security systems to manufacturing drones, and they're now producing kamikaze drones, and a lot of businesses are actually working, and startups are working in Ukraine in this field. And recently, a special contest was announced from one of Ukrainian entrepreneurs, and he promised $500,000 prize for those who will produce a drone or unmanned aircraft that will be able to land on the Red Square on May 9th. So we are all waiting today for the news about Ukrainian drone or unmanned aircraft to land on Red Square, and I hope that some Ukrainian entrepreneur will win this prize fund. So beside the jokes, Ukraine has really great potential in high-tech production in rocket industry. We've discussed on one of our previous show the Yuzhmash factory, which is situated in Dnipro, one of the major Ukrainian industrial centers. And that factory produced and is producing rockets for international space flight missions. And they have really talented engineers which are able to build rocket systems. So Ukrainians are talented not only in destroying Russian army, but also in producing and creating really amazing technical devices.
Excellent. That's what I always wanted to hear. In the meantime, I would like to thank you very much for today's show, and we'll see you in a couple of days, Friday, hopefully with great news. I've heard that in Bakhmut, Russians had to go back 1,000 meters because of the Ukrainians' attacks. So hopefully maybe it's the beginning of a huge Ukrainian counterattack. Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And bye-bye, everybody.
Ow.